All right, guys, welcome back to the Performance Playbook. Today I have the one and only Kelly Cox. Kelly, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Brando. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So, to my understanding, you actually yourself have a podcast too.
Sort of. I have not done much with it in the last year or so, but kind of during the lockdown, I needed something to occupy my time because I wasn't allowed to be in the office and whatnot. So I wanted to ask other massage therapists that have done higher level work. In a lot of cases, it did revolve around the Olympics, but sometimes they were just people who are really instrumental in the field or had really either unique or really important ideas. So I wanted to provide a bit of a source of information, point of reference, point of resource for other massage therapists who are like myself, more geared towards the sport realm, wanting to deal with athletes, work with athletes. So I started the Massage Tools podcast, and I ran, I think, something like 20 episodes of it. And it's just kind of one of those, I got real busy with traveling. The office was open again. I started working with more teams at University of North Carolina and was doing a bit more with diving. So I'm like, I could find time for this, but it's a lot of different interest going on at the same time. So unfortunately, that was one of the, I guess, sacrifices that I made to pursue some other things. But the episodes they're still up there if anyone's interested, if they're kind of in massage and looking towards it. They're still out there, Massage Tools podcast, but I haven't done anything with it in a little while, but I've had some folks be like, anytime you're ready, we're looking for more episodes. So it's good.
Did you find most of the information or like the elite massage therapist, was it within the US or was it more outside of the US when you found these people?
Very heavily, it was folks in the U.S. A lot of them I had met initially through like the NCAA championships for swimming and diving, and they were other people that were on deck. And it's actually impressive. It's one of those kind of behind the scenes things that either is not thought about or people don't talk about per se, but like the massive amount of talent that's on a pool deck that you don't see in the water is impressive. And piggybacking on that, like that massage crew back there, like, if we could do tattoos of Olympic rings, like that, for me personally, that's an athlete only thing. But if the providers back there, like you'd probably find anywhere from 5 to 10 people that have been at a games. It may be as far back as like 96, but could be as recent as Tokyo. But there's a pretty impressive amount of talent back buried in the torn out locker room, or they put up a tent at certain places. So it was the people that I was already talking to and the people I had kind of sought out as mentors to some extent, but like, you've been in this industry 20 years. I've only been in 3. Like, what are you doing for longevity? Like, what are you doing for your business? How do you manage traveling with teams and maintaining an office back home? Like, so all those questions that if you don't necessarily have a mentor immediately at your disposal, it was they were people that mentored me. And now I'm 13 years into the industry and people look at me and like, hey, when are you going to teach classes? Hey, when are you going to do another podcast? Hey, when are you going to... So it's, like I said, a lot of them I acquired either directly from personal interactions. Like the first episode was Carl Christie. He's one of my best friends. So, and we spend hours on pool decks, like talking and exchanging information and whatnot. So it was easy to start with him. And it was neat because it sort of perpetuated itself forward. Like I'd get an email from someone else be like, hey, you should have this person on the podcast. I'm like, I don't know who they are. And like, what's their elevator pitch? And I'd reach out and like, hey, I do a podcast. Would you be interested in being on? And it built itself out and I was going at an okay clip. And then just the office got real busy. And like I said, it's on the back burner for now, but yeah.
Was a lot of the information that you learned outside of the business side, but when you're talking to these like older veterans, is it Like what did you usually find out that you didn't already have the knowledge of? Was it like certain ways to work with fascia, or maybe techniques not to absolutely blast your fingers, or like what usually was the consistent piece there?
Um, so one of the things I used, there's a great book, and I was listening to some of your episodes of this kind of leading up to today, and
Mm,
you and Greg Duncan had talked about Tim Ferriss. His
mm,
one of my favorite books, period, but by him is The 4 Hour Chef, and
interesting.
it got the least amount. And if you listen to some interviews with Ferris, he says it's his biggest regret because he tried doing a launch on like Amazon with it and didn't go his normal route. But anyways, the important part, that book is it's it's how to learn, and he uses cooking as the vehicle. But it's
Mm,
just an analogy that you can extrapolate out. And he actually talks about like how to interview if you have the option to talk to top level people. And like one of the questions you can ask is like, hey, and I remember asking someone who's like a 30 some odd year veteran, I'm like, what's the thing that massage therapists are doing the least that's really important?
mm,
And it kind of framing it that way. And sometimes people, they have to stop, they have to think about it. It's not like, what's your favorite class? Like, what's your favorite stretch? Like, that technical stuff, that's so personal or whatnot that you're going to get 100 answers from 100 massage therapists. But the what do you see people in the field missing? Like, what are they missing the most, or what's most critical? And that's where I would get the more unique answers. So it wasn't always direct technical stuff, but it would be like one of them. Favorite piece of advice, and I got it maybe 3 years in, is build your referral network,
mm,
because I'm not an island. I can't solve every issue that comes in. So it's simply like know who you can send people to who are going to be good. Know the ortho that's good with knees. Know the ortho that's good with shoulders. Know the PT that can rehab an elbow. Once you kind of build that network around you, like fortunately I'm in like Chapel Hill, North Carolina. So I've got Duke University's hospital system. I have UNC's hospital system, plus everything that's kind of born out of that. So there's a density of medical professionals. So like trying to pick through and susses out and find who's good. It, it's a sometimes it's analysis paralysis because there are so many, but the important part is if once you build that kind of network, you send someone out to the PT who's going to get their knee better. That client has a lot more. They know you're in it for the right reasons, because it's like I've quote unquote fired clients because I'm like, I can't help you. This is our second
mm,
session. You've gotten maybe 1 or 2% improvement. I'm not the provider for you. Maybe that means you need someone with a different job title. Maybe you need someone who does a different style of massage, whatnot. But when you refer them out, the confidence in you comes back fivefold. And they may not come back to you for their knee, but they'll come back to you like, my neck hurts. Like, can you help me with that? Like, and so there's a trust that's built, that relationship. And you start sending enough people to a certain PT, they're like, well, this guy actually knows what he's doing with his clients, and he's not running them through, just picking their pockets or anything. They'll start referring back to you. So it was such a valuable piece of advice, but you're never going to get that with like, hey, what technique do you use for hamstrings, or how do you get after an adductor, or things like that. So those are like good questions, but like, I guess to put it in a diving context, do you go like, hey man, how do you do a rip? Or do you like, how do you get your mindset ready for this practice? So it's, there, yeah, that was one of my approaches, was not necessarily to ask the really obvious questions, but the ones that may open up a deeper thought process in the person I was asking. So that
yeah.
was sort of what I was going after with a lot of my questioning.
Yeah, I feel like you don't get that too frequently, especially even if you were looking in like the strength and conditioning field. If someone doesn't necessarily feel like they know how to solve a problem well, you don't see them going like, well, here, like take this person or at least help me out. It's usually like, well, I'm stubborn, like I've got it, I'm good. But that is a good lesson, is to actually reach out and try to utilize the people around you. I feel like that could be spread out a little bit more, but kind of with that though, I want to walk back to how you even got into it. I always find this kind of interesting. What is your story leading into you becoming a massage therapist? What was the path for you? Was it first sports and then you kind of found that love through, fixing, or how did you get to where you are?
Yeah, the kind of elevator pitch of it is I've been a martial artist since I was 11. So I'm coming up on nearly 30 years, and that makes me feel really old to say that, but that was the sport I did as a kid. Like I had done a couple other, athletic endeavors, but like martial arts was what I really gravitated towards. And I had a different passion originally, so I went to college and ended up becoming an animal trainer for a couple years and realized like this is fun, but this isn't using enough tools in my toolbox. And I actually had taken me away from martial arts because I was putting all my efforts into the training side of it. And I decided like I'm missing out on something that's been part of my identity. Let me get back to this. And I'm going to need to change careers. And one of the things that I've always, I guess, felt useless is when someone got hurt. And it happens in any endeavor. If it's physically involved, someone's going to get hurt. But it's like, what up, training partner? Why are you sitting on the bench? Why aren't you out on the mat? They're like, oh, this is going on. I'm like, that sucks. Or every once in a while, it might have been my fault that they're sitting on the bench. But more importantly, it was like, it was someone that was benched that couldn't participate. And it was for something that's like, oh, the doc says it's going to be X number of weeks or X number of months and whatnot. So I wanted a skill set that I could use to get my training partners back on the mat. Some of it's because they're my friends and I want them out there. Some of it's because they're a good training partner. And I'm like, oh, you're the guy that always kicks me in the face with that weird little hook thing. So I need you back so I can defend that and I don't have to worry about it anymore. So sometimes a little more personal or with my development involved. But ultimately, it came back to like, I wanted something I could use to help my training partners get back on the mat. So when I got into the massage field, sport massage was kind of a no-brainer. It's what I went after hardest in my schooling. It's what I've spent most of my time pursuing, in my continuing education, as I wanted to be a better therapist for my clients, because in my mind, it's like, these are my training partners. So let's get them back to doing what they do faster. So.
Did you with the whole animal training side? I don't know if there was like understanding a lot of their physiology and their anatomy. Did that ever play into actually learning the human body a little bit better and understanding that?
So if I rewound a little bit more, when I went to college first time, I did an undergrad with psych with a minor in zoology. So I was always the guy, like as a kid, I was eating the bowl of cereal, watching, Discovery Channel, watching lions go after zebras and whatnot. So the biological, especially the zoological science, has always been something I've been interested in. And so with the schooling, there was bio, there's a lot more in like some comparative morphology, if you want to throw some fancy titles out there, but like anatomy has been something of interest to me. And when I went to, started working with the animals, like, yeah, there's some traits that are interesting that are kind of, mammalian traits. So we take specific postures, and what's neat about having worked with an animal that can't verbally communicate, like, hey, that's too much pressure, you learn to read the nonverbal cues. And some of them, like I said, are more or less universal amongst mammals. So it lets you like, okay, this is a nonverbal cue that this animal doesn't want to be here right now, so let's not push it. So now when I've got an athlete on the table, start getting into an adductor, and they don't have to tell me it's spicy. I can tell because their eyes twitching a little bit, and they're getting more or less vocal without actually saying anything. Like, like, all right, we need to back off a little. So yeah, I guess to some extent there's, again, to say it, like the universal mammalian principles, and then there's things that are more specific to species. But like most people like innately know, if like they walk up to a dog and it's got its leg, tail tucked between its leg and it's hunkered and back, it's like, all right, this thing doesn't want me to run over and boop its nose. Like this is communicating very clearly, like, don't touch me. And that's a pretty easy thing for most people to see, even if they have no animal experience. We just kind of understand it because we're primates. We're in the animal kingdom, so we're cool, but we're not that cool. So
Yeah. Do you think there's any utility in actually being able to study that? I mean, obviously that was something that you were passionate about. But is there like utility for other people walking into that field to actually look into it, or it's, just be good at your job kind of thing?
I guess which job? Like coming into massage, does that help to understand?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, or like any physical therapy, athletic training, just to be able to like understand those cues a little bit better.
um, that's it. Like, should it be part of schooling to some extent? I think so. But it's like a lot of other things. Like, you have to prioritize what you teach people. So is it more important that you take, well, because you threw out PT. So if you take a physical therapist, is it more important that you teach the PT the intricacies of the human anatomy? And then, like, when they're doing their clinicals, like, that's when you teach them, like, hey, you see how they're bugging their eyes right now? Like, you're a little too deep. So, it's something that should be understood. But I guess it would be tough to, like, oh, it has to be taught in this manner. Like, putting too much emphasis on it might be tricky. And like I said, there's a lot of things to balance with education. So is it advantageous for someone to pay attention to those things? Absolutely. And that's what is going to make you better in a lot of things. But if you ever interact with people, you already have most of the cues. It's just, all right, this is a different interaction. Now it's my fingertips in certain part of tissue. And I'm like, okay, this person who's normally talkative just got real quiet. So there's a change in behavior. So that's something to be done. But yeah, like I said, the priority to it, or how rigorously it should be investigated and studied and taught, like, some people are naturally good with people, like charismatic, they're innately good. Others need to be taught. So it's one of those, like, if let people, I guess, have a little bit of the freedom to figure out, like, I'm not so good with the people skills, so let me bump up people skills. And I joke about it, but that is a bit of a journey that I've had to go upon. Like, I'm not knocking him. I love my dad, but he's military and he was an engineer. And two groups that are not known for being overly social or great with communication skills. So, some of it, I grew up in that household, and, I love the man, and, but it has shaped a little bit of what I've now had to spend some of my efforts on how to interact a little better with people and things of that nature. Try to understand. It's like, yeah, even though I may feel that I'm right, I still have to be able to communicate this to you and get you to buy into what I'm saying. So it's a tricky question on, should we teach everybody these nuanced things, or should be like, let's do like 30 minutes of watching dolphins swim around. Is this dolphin happy or is this dolphin sad? Like, that's not, there's better uses of people's time for the most part in a PT or a massage program or whatnot. So
I actually, speaking upon, you said you were doing psych too, correct?
Yeah.
So the last podcast I was doing with Graham Tuttle. he's a trainer in California, but he brings up a really good point of when he's trying to, like, help someone and fix, let's just say, their feet, because he's pretty good with that at this point. It's not about just fixing the injury, but it's also about fixing the mind. Like, you almost have to, like, at the same time, they have to coincide with one another, or, you're going to get to, for example, you get to the edge of the platform and, oh, it's going to hurt if I jump through properly, and then I actually end up messing up my mechanics and then make it worse. Do you think while you're doing massage, like, there is that piece of like almost sports psychology going into, allowing the person to express themselves and then almost giving them some reassurance, or like trying to not just massage the body and fix that, but massage the mind.
Yeah. One of the ways I like to kind of think about my job, and I think this is the big secret with physical therapy, with massage therapy, chiropractic, athletic training, and you could easily extend this into personal training to an extent, but usually the first group we're dealing with injury, so that's sort of the mindset I have. But all I'm doing is giving you the sense of safety to go through a movement. So if you come in like, man, it hurts when I rotate this way, you've got that fear, that apprehension. So if we get in, we work on some tissues, and then we go and we start doing some range of motion, and you're like, oh, like I can look to the left now. I can back my car out of the driveway, or, whatnot. That's all I'm doing, is facilitating that sense of safety and letting you or your nervous system know that it's okay to move here. So, like I said, ultimately that's a big secret. I don't fix you. I give you the confidence to move, and then that movement pattern that gets grooved into the neural patterns that, is going to pump nutrient rich blood into the area, pump the lymph, the metabolic byproducts out of it. And that's, like I said, it's just giving you the confidence to do what you need to do. So sometimes it's, I guess there can and absolutely would be a sports psychology or just a general psychology component to it. But that's like every interaction you have. Like your coach does sports psychology, your teammates are doing sports psychology and whatnot. Just it's so I guess that component's there, and I'm not trying to dodge the answer, but it's like, yeah, you do need to talk with somebody. And so I guess another expression of it is like a lot of times, like people like they're afraid. The biggest thing athletes in general are going to be afraid of is that you're going to tell them they can't do their sport. They can't dive. They can't do whatever. So sometimes it's not telling the athlete no, or you can't go work out. It's like, you can go work out, but we're going to modify it this way. Yeah. And it's giving them an alternative that's sort of that middle ground with, all right, you get into that deep position and it hurts. Well, are we going to make you do that 10 times during practice? Like, what are we really training you to do at this point, or what are you training yourself to avoid? So I think sometimes the sports psych side of it comes into like, well, how can we modify? How can this session be beneficial to you? And then how can what you do after the session, which is really where all the quote unquote magic happens. It's not on the table, it's off the table and between sessions. So same kind of idea of,
so there's not necessarily, because I feel like even when I'm, let's say, because we've worked together quite a bit, and at some point I wanted to express the story that we kind of had to go through in Tokyo, since that was quite a stressful position for me. But like while someone's on the table, like there's probably so many different types of people to be worked on, but do you ever find that usually people, when they start talking, it's not always about the injury, but they just start talking? Because again, I guess one thing that I feel like you're known for is just kind of being like goofy and funny, and it's like that could just be because that's who you are. But I guess I was kind of veering towards, is it almost on purpose though? Like you can tell the athlete's stressed out, they're tenser than they should be, and I was kind of leaning towards that psychology piece of, hey, like being super stressed out and overthinking about this one piece of your body is just only going to make it worse. So you almost feel like you playing into it and lightening the mood and making it a little bit more fun and maybe taking them out of, the sport kind of actually ends up helping them massage or just injury wise.
So if you want to put that context to it, then I tend to be a goofy person. That is a personality trait. But to your point, sometimes I do lean into it a little bit more if I feel that breaking whatever behavioral pattern you're in, would be advantageous. And usually if an athlete's kind of in that rumination of like, I got finals coming up, or I have to make finals, and they kind of get into that, like, this idea that the mind and body is separate is probably one of the biggest atrocities to, medicine and healthcare and whatnot. And there has absolutely been a big change in the past, I don't know, decade or so, to stop separating them and really get back into that mind component. But ultimately, like, your mindset affects your body. So if you're stressed, well, that makes my job harder if you're on the table. Because now I'm dealing with, like, we have these natural reactions, and I talk about those kind of mammalian responses. But like humans, when we get stressed, we all get like that upper trap thing in our yeah. It's so as I understand it, that's actually humans, if you go back a couple hundred years, our biggest predators were big cats, and they would jump out of the trees and grab us by the back of the neck. So when we're startled and when we're stressed, we shrug our shoulders and drop our head to protect the back of our neck. Normal response. But in modern times, we don't know the difference between traffic and tigers, or our boss and a bear. Like, it's just, so this is what we do when we're scared, when we're stressed. So that's a normal response. But, if I'm trying to work a shoulder because you did a long tower session and you're like, I had to, I'm like, dude, let's breathe. Or like, hey, a priest, a minister, and a rabbi walk into a bar. The bartender says, what is some kind of joke? And exactly, you laugh. That changes your personality, that behavioral pattern. It breaks it just enough that, hey, now we can actually have a successful session. That's about as deep as I feel going with breaking patterns, though, because people get on the table. Sometimes people just need to vent. Their synchro partner's annoying them. Their coach said something that whatever. The Chinese diver cut them off on the platform, all these different things. Sometimes people just need to be like, oh my God, da, 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 da. And you watch, like, as they're like, this person, yada, 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 and this person, yada, 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 yada. And then they're like, hey, that was a great session. Thanks. I feel great. I'm like, I haven't even touched you yet. It's like, So, the running joke with some of us, I'm like, I know therapist is part of the job title, but it's massage therapist, not psychotherapist. But it's, but that's one of those nuanced things that, it's hard to train. And I know I've made mistakes over the years and said the wrong thing, or, what I said maybe wasn't helpful to the situation. It may not necessarily have worsened it, but a lot of times it's just like, nod and smile, and then, oh, is that so? How does it make you feel? And, but just sort of ask those questions that don't imply that I'm putting any judgment on it, and just listen to the person. So actively listening to it. And then, if it makes sense to, pretend to trip over the edge of the table and break their thought process, then I'll do that, I'll sacrifice my body for the team. That's cool.
So you talk about, between sessions, it's like that's where the important work actually happens. I feel like a lot of people will get worked on and then go, well, I feel better, and then kind of get stagnant and do nothing, and then go into their training session or whatever and might start running back into the issue. What are some like tips and tricks you usually give athletes to kind of prep before they, go back into their sport, that you found that's been like very useful?
It's kind of interesting when you say they go stagnant. It's sometimes people do need to maybe be a little more stagnant if they're overdoing it. Because if they're, and well, because you're a diver, that's where my mind's going to be stuck with my examples. But it's like, you have time on the platform, like, You may avoid the springboard, but a lot of people they've got time on boards, time on platform, they've got dry land, they have weights, they have anything else they're doing. Like, so there's a volume. Your body can obviously adapt and adjust to that volume and whatnot. But if you're dealing with an injury, it's like, hey, all right, like, cool. This whatever joint is feeling better, or the muscles around that joint are feeling better. You're like, great, I'm taking time off of tower. I'm like, that's cool. And then I'll watch people like go and do handstands for 20 minutes. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're not going at the same force as popping off the tower, but was that the right call on what you should be doing instead of jumping off a 10 meter. So sometimes it's like, well, what's the easiest question I ask a lot of athletes is when we finish, I'm like, what's your plan for the next 24 hours? And some of them like, oh, I'm going off to practice now. I'm like, all right, bad on me for not being like, hey, what's your plan after this massage? Like, I should have asked at the beginning, but um yeah, I guess the tricky part is like there's so many variables involved. So like,
Yeah.
what should the athlete be doing between sessions? Um, if there is more of an acute injury, what I recommend typically is if you can up your sleep, up your sleep. Like that's, again, I'm going to hop on another soapbox here for a minute. Massage is great, but massage is a very small component of what actually helps with recovery. So it's a foundation of sleep. You get into hydration and nutrition would be, on a pyramid on top of that. And then you get into some movement practices, whether if you want to call that mobility, if you want to call it just general movement or walking or things like that. There's that stuff. And then there's like this tiny little thing at the top with that's your Normatec, that's your cold tub, that's your sauna, that's massage, that's all this other stuff. So like it's a massage, even with the more like sport massage, it's a bit more technical, a little more specific to tissues. Even that, it's still such a small component. Like you can't out massage a bad night's sleep. So if someone's coming in between sessions, like number one, how much are you sleeping, and see if you can up that a little bit. And unfortunately, the way it tends to go, the easier way to get sleep is to add it on to the beginning. So going to bed earlier, because we tend to have our circadian rhythms and we wake up at the certain time. Most people have a hard time sleeping in. They could go to bed earlier, but they typically don't. And then they're like, oh, I'll just sleep in more. And then they never sleep in. And if you start looking at some of the sleep habits, it's like always get up at the same time. But if you need to add hours, go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
So, get sleep. If they're, I'll tell them to look into their nutrition. I'm not a dietitian. I'm not a nutritionist. That's so deep a rabbit hole. I have no interest in going down it. But if they don't know what they're eating, or if they're just like, I've got the meal plan at the dining hall, and I'm like, okay, well, if you're in the NCAA system, see if you have access to sports nutrition and talk to them. If you're more of an elite athlete, talk to that. Find a resource in town. I have someone here that I've got two people that I refer clients to. If they're more of an endurance, it's one. If they're more lifters, it's a different one. But I'm like, get that squared away, because you need the raw materials for an injury to heal. So it's not only the raw materials, but sleeping is that time for the construction crew to get to it. So you need both of those there. And then people are generally kind of dehydrated and not drinking enough water. Not saying they need to walk around with gallon jugs every day, but probably upping their fluids is a good thing too. And then kind of on the movement side of it is just getting people to move the area a little bit more. So if it's a shoulder, not saying they necessarily have to go out and load that shoulder, but even they can do, simple arm circles or things like that, everything to comfort. They don't necessarily have to in most cases, they don't have to get after it. They shouldn't get after it, but moving the tissues that were just worked on, again, it's going to pump that nutrient rich blood in. It's going to help get rid of the debris, all the garbage, get that out. So it's encouraging them to move in, safer, comfortable ranges of motion initially. And that's going to, it compounds upon itself. The nervous system's like, okay, I can move to so many degrees where I was scared to do that before. Now I'm comfortable doing it. And then that gets faster outcomes than that. But that's sort of my general approach and recommendation to clients after sessions. Like there's a certain amount where it's like, I can only tell them to do so much because of scope of practice and things like that. So I do have to manage them like, you probably actually need to work on some strength in certain areas. But again, that goes back to that referral network. And I'm like, hey, go see this movement professional. They'll get that all the musculature around your ankle going again after a busted ankle, or go see this person for shoulder rehab if they don't already have access to a resource for that. So those are things. Sleep more, make sure you're eating, decent. I'm not prescribing or recommending any specific diet type, but I'm like, if you don't know what you're eating, super simple. Get an app like MyFitnessPal or something. Just track it for 2 weeks. Like that's probably the best nutrition advice that I've come across. As long as someone's not going to be overly obsessed with tracking their things. Like there's people that if you give them data, they get fixated on the data. So that comes into that like psychology part of it. I'm like, this is a person that data is dangerous. Probably the same person that shouldn't have a Whoop or some other wearable. I'm like, they only got 9,999 steps and they're going to like pace the hallway until they get their 12,000. So know their personality type. But in general, for someone who's curious about nutrition, I'm like, just track what you're doing for 2 weeks. And if nothing else, it saves you a lot of time when you go see a dietitian or nutritionist, because they're going to be like, they're going to ask about, health history, and they're going to ask, well, what are you eating? You're like, here's what I've eaten for the last 2 weeks. And that's usually enough time to get a good idea of like, all right, this is typically what you're eating. Here's sort of what your macros look like and stuff like that. But those are my big, general pieces of advice post session. Like I said, sleep more, hydrate, eat food, and, move within comfort, and then if there's more appropriate movement, get to someone who can guide them through that.
Yeah. And then when we're kind of looking at someone, like for example, I'm obsessed with climbing, and that's kind of going to be the new thing that I go into once I'm done with diving. But there's
about mid-August.
But it's like there's a lot of people that might not either be able to afford, just going to a professional, or it's like they would prefer to just kind of work on it themselves. Is there any like at home or just something that they could do at a gym that would kind of replicate massage and, be able to at least do some stuff themselves?
Yeah. So there are good tools. The challenge to good tools is knowing when and where to use them. So like lacrosse balls or tennis balls and using those on areas, foam rollers, the percussion vibration devices like a Hypervolt or a Theragun or things like that. They're good. But if finances are really a thing, like save up and go to a decent therapist, massage, or PT to at least get advice on where you should be working. And here's why. So I know a lot of people that run into issues with like, they feel that pain like between their shoulder blades, like between the shoulder blade and the spine, and they'll dig on it for like hours. And they're like, yeah, I get some relief for like a half hour and then it's back. I'm like, cool. Have you touched your pecs or your lats yet? And they're like, no, why would I do that? Because that changes the shoulder position, and then you've got these weak little muscle. I say weak. They're designed for endurance. They're not designed to be a prime mover. So unless you get into some weird training regimen, like your bicep is always going to be stronger than your tricep. Like I said, unless you only do tricep extensions and you're that weird guy just doing that and only that in the gym, the biceps are designed to be stronger. Basically, oversimplification, anything that pulls you into fetal position is stronger than anything that takes you out of it. Because fetal, it's your most protected. It also brings food to your mouth, so you can do all the primary things, and you want strength there. So if you're having a problem in an extensor, look at the flexor. So that would be a way to go. And if you don't have a strong background in anatomy, like think of a massage session as getting a coach, but for like a tension pattern. So it's like, yeah, I could go jump off a 5 meter all day long, but I'm going to get hurt in the process. Like, just like, yeah, I can do this twisty thing, right? Ah! So have a coach to some extent, using that term loosely, but like, I send my clients home with some areas they can address on their own. And I try to make myself obsolete for the issue. Like, I joking, I play with my clients. I'm like, yeah, I get bored if I have to work your adductor every single time we come in. So how can we fix this as fast as possible? So it's a little twist on it. Like I'm happy to work with clients as long as we need to on things, but I want them to get better. And that goes back to that motivation of like, I'm not like, I want you back on the mat. I want you back on the boards. I want you back on the field or whatever. So if I'm like, yeah, come back in next week and we'll massage the exact same area and do the exact same thing, it's like, that's, if you're getting into that pattern, if it feels like you're in that pattern with a provider, well, maybe it's time to find a different coach. You know, if you can't find that coach that teaches you to rip, all right, go find the coach that can.
Yeah.
But like for home care, for self-care and whatnot, I mean, again, it's really more how you use the tool and where to use it, not what tool it is. Because like I said, you can do a lot of this on the cheap. Like I said, a lacrosse ball, a tennis ball, like that's generally a better, like that's a good tool. You can get a lot done with a tennis ball. And a lot of times I actually prefer tennis balls to lacrosse balls because lacrosse balls are more dense and people just get mean with themselves and they don't have to be mean. You know, a lot of times like there's some of these older models of what we thought was going on, like foam rollers don't break down scar tissue. They don't break down fascia. My thumbs don't break down fascia. So what's going on with these tools is that you're engaging the nervous system. You're getting mechanoreceptors, you're stimulating mechanoreceptors, and then you get a response from the nervous system around that. So you don't have to hammer it. And if you do have to hammer it, do you need maybe just a little bit of mindfulness in that area? Like, are you just like trashing your IT band? And it's like, well, that's a different one. Like, are you trashing like your quad? Like, do you need to trash your quad, or do you need to just like sit with a little bit of pressure on that tight area, breathe, like setting your intention to that area, like the commonly phrase of like just breathe into where the foam roller is, or breathe into the stretch. Obviously, your lungs aren't expanding, your diaphragm's not expanding all the way down to your quad and then back up, but it's a way to help you like tune your nervous system to pay attention to that spot. And then that's probably the mechanism that's getting that tissue to soften, release, change, like I said, change the neural input and you change the neural output. So, you get a lot done with a tennis ball. Yeah. So I guess if you're looking for like references, like a library of thought to go into, that's a tricky one too. Cause, again, I guess I would encourage someone if there's a provider, you know, PT, massage, athletic trainer that they can get to, even if they just need to save up a little bit of money to see them and get, hey, this is why this hurts. Not just of, hey, my back hurts, so they drop an elbow on it. It's like, my back hurts. I'm like, well, yeah, but look at your hip position. And that's probably the cause of what's going on. So something that can kind of give you some information on why the situation it is, and then give you some tools and go about self-care with a much better direction than kind of trying to do it on your own. Like autodidactic is awesome, but it can be a lot faster if you get somebody who's just like, hey, why don't you hit these 3 spots? Those are your big, those will net you more, you know, benefit than anything else. And then come back in a month or 2 or something like that.
Yeah.
Like I have a couple clients that see me like quarterly, maybe like twice a year. And they come in when they have an injury. We hit like 2 sessions back to back. They feel a lot calmer. Their nervous system's better off. And then I give them some ways to work those tissues themselves at home, and then I don't see them again until they mess something else up or things like that. So, like I said, you don't have to necessarily invest in massage like every week for, you know, now until games or something like that. But I think having, you know, a good guide for your body is advantageous. So, but I'm biased because it's my day job. So,
walk me back to the foam rolling, because I feel like for a really long time, maybe the mindset on foam rolling was kind of off, or not necessarily off, but we didn't maybe understand what it did, because I feel like there was such a big emphasis on, dude, you need to roll out all the time. It's so good for, releasing tension or whatever. I feel like things have changed a good amount. What does it really look like? Is it beneficial? Is it not?
So it's not harmful unless you're feeling beat up by using it. So like you can do tissue damage, and that's the thing. So ultimately, a lot of things are going to come down to a Goldilocks zone. Too little isn't doing anything, too much isn't doing anything. Or if you want a more medically pertinent description, it's a minimum effective dose. There's a certain amount. So is getting on a foam roller advantageous? Yes. Because in a lot of cases, if you foam roll and you're not getting on that thing that just looks like a PVC pipe, that's like, oh, let me get the one that looks like it should be an off-road tire or a torture device. All right. So foam rolling in and of itself, I talked about that idea of like massage stimulates mechanoreceptors. You can calm muscles down with a foam roller. So relax them, release them, whatever term you're comfortable using. And that's done through engaging the nervous system. But what you're not going to do is change fascia, because fascia it's not permanent, but it is only changed by time under tension. So like getting on and rolling your quads isn't going to get you better knee flexion on the roller from a fascial standpoint. But I'm trying to pull up the right terms on it just out of my head, but basically like you have an anatomical length and a functional length on any muscle. Okay, so if we're looking at like knee flexion, so if you're actively engaging your quads, you're squeezing your quads, it's going to be really tough to get your heel to your butt. Okay, so that's an active process where you're aware of it, you're activating your quads, things like that. That's going to be tough. Now, if you lay on a table and like your athletic trainer tries to push your heel to your butt in that passive range, you're going to get to this end point. And that's probably more of a mechanical or that anatomical shortness. So basically it's how long the chain is or how much tension you have in the muscle. So to kind of simplify it. So foam rolling can get the tissues to relax. It can take the quads if they're in like an active process of contracting. You can use a foam roller to calm that down and relax, and then you can get a better range of motion. But once the muscle is relaxed and the myofascium is relaxed, you're going to run out of tissue. Foam roller's not going to break up that chain. It's not going to break up the fascia or other tissues. It's just you've run out of links in the chain, and the only way you're going to get more links on that chain is to basically strength train and do some not specialized stretching, but stretching and strength training to build a longer muscle. Yep. So that's, I think what happened is it was conflated earlier in the days of foam rolling of like, oh yeah, you break down the fascia and then you get more, more range of motion out of something. Like, no, you're not breaking down fascia, but you can decrease the tone of muscle in an area. So if foam rolling feels good for somebody, do it. If it's on there and like you've got the rumble strip and you're wincing the whole time, my opinion, my stance, that's too aggressive of an intervention. Like take it down a notch. Like put it at really, if you can keep it out of sort of that like sympathetically engaging, that fight or flight engaging pressure, keep it under that. I feel that's a better place to be, and you'll probably yield as good a result as when you're grimacing, but you don't have to deal with all of the attempts at like homeostasis after you've been in that fight or flight. So it's like, I've got, cortisol dumping through my system. I've got these, adrenaline, all this other stuff. Like, yeah, like you probably get the same result if you could be like conversational with rolling.
Mm.
Like just, hey, how is that? You're like, oh, that was spicy. All right, now I'm back in and rolling. So it doesn't have to be this evil process with some of the things. Like I said, my impression is that some folks are really aggressive with it, and I don't know if that's based off of the older mindset of breaking up fascia, which again, fascia, it has a tensile strength nearly that of steel.
Mm.
So I'm like,
Yeah.
this ain't breaking it up. That PVC pipe ain't breaking it up. So, but you can create changes in the system by changing the input. So just sensation to the area is really the strongest mechanism, at least as as the current mechanism that's proposed. It's like, yeah, we stimulate mechanoreceptors and you get a response. And just if you play around with a foam roller, if you do a long, slow roll, and I keep going back to quads, but if you long, slow roll down the roller, that tends to be more down regulating in the nervous system. Your leg will feel more relaxed. You'll even find like a systemic response if you do long, slow rolls versus if you do a short, fast. That tends to be up regulating to the system. So if you wanted to hop on, get a little sensation in an area, quick roll, like you'll probably feel more energized like, oh, I feel real good after that quick roll. Let's do this.
Mm.
Great. So, but that's kind of a little bit of that evidence towards that neural model of foam rolling. Like, yeah, you've low and slow, that gets you relaxed, and then quick and fast, cross fiber-ish with it, like that wakes up the muscles a bit. So, the tool is good. I think the mechanism is the misunderstood part, and then that led to some inaccuracies and some dogma around it. But yeah. I think foam rollers are good tools in the end. Just go at them with a maybe a little bit less aggressive than was originally thought or it evolved to at one point. Going easy, keep it out of that really spicy range if you can. And be mindful, like try to connect your mind with the body part you're working on. So don't look at your phone. Don't, I said being conversational, like, all right, yeah, if, some social time with a teammate while your foam roll out is going to be, overall mentally health or mental health wise better for you. Cool. Yeah. Have the conversation, but majority of the time, just try to be focused on what you're doing. Like, hey, that's tender today. Why is that tender? Kind of ask those questions, and you could use it in one part as a mindfulness exercise. But I hope that answered. Like I said, it's a good tool. I just think the mechanism was misunderstood initially, and then as it goes with science, as we understand more, we change our opinions on things. So
yeah, I feel like you could interchange, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but I feel like everything you just said you could interchange with lacrosse ball, the hypervolt, like almost anything. It's just because I do feel like there is that almost like dogma. It's like use it or don't use it. It's useless or it's super beneficial, and like you usually don't. It's always like black and white. It's like, well, like that's kind of hard to believe because like even if my back feels tight, being able to utilize a foam roller to crack my back is useful. And then, like you said, I've used it to kind of down regulate before I go to sleep, and that helps my sleep. So it's just kind of hard to like really feel so black and white about it, and I find that perspective for everything kind of makes a lot more sense.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that goes back to a little bit of the Goldilocks zone, but like some tools are better for certain times, like, and that's it. And part of being an athlete is learning your body and learning what you need at different times. So you want a foam roll to go to sleep, that puts you to sleep, great. Foam rollers are easy to travel with, like especially the ones that fold in half now and then pop it out. It's like, okay, you're going to go travel to a country where you're, 7 time zones away, and now it's 1 PM for your circadian rhythm, but it's 9 o'clock at night, and you're trying to get to sleep. And you're like, hey, here's part of my sleep hygiene back home is I foam roll for 20 minutes, I brush my teeth. Well, there's some classical conditioning that goes on with that. You're like, oh, I just foam rolled, I just brushed my teeth, wow, I'm really tired, and then it can help. So like, yeah, it's understanding the tool, understanding the timing. That's the thing. It's like I there aren't a whole lot of tools out there that are hard no's for me.
Mm.
There's ones that I'm really cautious around, and I'm like, I don't know if you want to go, free falling onto that so right or something like that. Like that's one of those I'm like, yeah, like that I'm apprehensive around that one, but that's because you're throwing a harder piece of plastic in your abdomen.
Yeah.
And that's there's a lot of risk with that compared to a foam roller. Like you got to foam roll really wrong to hurt yourself, but so right, and I'm not picking on the product. It's I've hopped on one before. It's not as bad as I thought it was,
Yeah.
but I'm still like just a touch apprehensive because there are things that can happen in that there's a greater risk with it than most of the other tools I can think of off the top of my head. But yeah, it is a gray world. Like there's very few things that are truly black and white. And that's, it's kind of funny, like a quick tangent on Taoism, the yin and the yang, it's like this black and white, but like when you break down the symbol, like, well, the black portion has a little white dot in it and the white portion has a little black dot in it. Even yin and yang, what we think of as duality, doesn't just have black and white. It's like, no, there's elements within this, and that breaks down into 10,000 myriad things and all this other stuff. So, but yeah, there's not a lot of black and white things in the world. So I want to be too caught on the dogma around it. But
yeah, well, so with that too, I find it super interesting because I feel like, and you've been pretty good with flossing. I did want to talk about this. I feel like you kind of utilize both massage and movement at the same time, like really trying to promote blood flow. And I feel like that is something that a lot of people can utilize at home with a better understanding. Could you kind of like walk us through the utility of flossing and then maybe how to do it for a knee?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when the question that people ask me, like, what do I do for myself? Like, I've got a foam roller at home. I've got, I happen to have a whole bunch of these like trigger point balls. I'm at my office, so I have everything here. But when I'm at home, I've got the trigger point ball. I've got some other. I have a Theracane, and then floss. Like floss bands and cups are probably the things I use the most. But for people who don't know what a floss band is, they come in usually 2 or 4 inch wide bands that are about 7.5 feet long. And the idea is you wrap them around an area. So we'll use the knee as an example. Bordering on dogmatic, I always go distal to proximal. So if I'm wrapping a knee, I always start on the ankle side and then wrap towards the hip. I like Rock Tape's methodology where they do a 50% stretch on the band and a 50% overlap. And then you take that, you wrap up the knee. Probably generally the consensus is don't put the band right across your patella. That can be uncomfortable when you're doing range of motion, but then, finish the wrap up. The other thing you can do is you can wrap up to your knee, like up to the bottom of your kneecap, and do some stuff, and then you can take the band off and then wrap above your kneecap and go up the thigh. Honestly, it's one of those, if you've got massive legs and you're like some of my power lifters or some of the cyclists that I've worked with, is like they have quads that are like my torso, and I'm just like, Jesus. So for them, we need 2 bands because one band won't really cross their knee because there's just so much tissue. So there's a lot of like nuance to it. But the short version is you wrap the tissue with the band, and what the band does is it basically compresses. So you've got circumferential pressure squeezing everything back to the middle, and that's good. Compression's great for injuries in general. But what's nice about the floss band is that you can now do range of motion. And if it's the first time you're using it, I recommend open chain. So with a knee, basically if you sit on a chair or sit on something a little higher so your leg can swing freely, start with some easy knee, leg extension, leg flexion, like just getting that knee to go through as much range of motion as is comfortable with the band on. And the idea is if you tack down a lot of tissue and then you create movement, other tissues have to shear against each other. And that shearing force can help free up and create some more space between layers. And the space between layers is a good thing. It creates room for hyaluronic acid, which is, in this case, in and around muscle and fascia, it's the lubricant. It's like synovial fluid in the joints. It's hyaluronic acid between the layers of fascia and muscle. So you squeeze down, you get the shearing as you go through the knee flexion, the knee extension, and then when you pop the band off, there's this opportunity for more fluid exchange through the area. So they're pretty cheap. They'll set you back maybe $20 or so for like the 2-inch wide bands. I recommend them highly. I use them on myself. Again, like anything else, you don't have to wrap it so your hand turns purple and you're like, I can't feel my fingers, but I'm gonna work my elbow. And I'm like, you don't have to wrap it that hard. Just especially anything new, you want to do what's called graded exposure. Is like start light and then work up to a level that's heavy. So the first time you wrap, like you don't have to do that 50-50. You can start with less just to see what it feels like. So from a self-care, like I said, you can wrap and then do open chain. And as you progress, you can get to a closed chain movement. Like if you wanted to do a squat or lunges, some movements in and around that way. And it's just different ways to engage the tissue. Yeah, so I guess that's like the pitch for floss bands. They're good. You were talking about movement. I do try to incorporate movement into my massage sessions, but that kind of goes back to that. The whole purpose of massage and all the other manual therapies is to make you feel safe moving so that when you get off the table and go out, you feel safe moving. So if you're like, it hurts to do A, B, and C. And I'm like, okay, well, let's do A. All right, let's do some intervention. And like, I'm going to passively take you through the A. And it's like, hey, see, your arm can go here. All right, cool. Now let's go on and continue along. Now you do it. Oh, it feels better? Cool. Do we need to keep going with this, or should we move on to B and then we'll go on to B and then go on to C and etc. But that's all I'm doing is giving input to your nervous system. Like, it's okay to go here. You can go here and it's not going to hurt. You can go here and it's you understand without understanding that it's safe to go back to that. So you'll go back into a more normalized movement pattern. That answer your floss band knee / movement and massage?
Yeah, it's perfect. I guess just for people to kind of have more of an idea, because the knee is an obvious one. You can go the knee, the elbow, the ankle, maybe shins. Like, what are some like common ones that are just really good, that are like common injuries that people can utilize it for?
So the caveat with any injury, it's probably not a bad idea to get it checked out, but
I guess more specific, like places to utilize it.
Yeah. So, the easiest places to use it are going to be on the extremities. So I've done it for wrist and forearm, but mostly as recovery, not even injury. If I've had a long day at the office and then I go do jujitsu and I'm doing a lot of grip stuff, like I'll go home and I'll wrap my forearms for, a couple minutes, do some range of motion stuff just to help with the recovery side of it. So there's the tissue care, and then there's that squeezing. There's a benefit to that. It's a poor man's Normatec if you really wanted to get to it. Like, kidding aside, like, yeah, you can do compression. It's just a lot slower because you got to put the band on and you do some, a retention time around 3 minutes, and then you take it off and you do the other ankle, and then you take it off and do the calf, and then you can go to the other calf, and then you go to the other knee, and then the quad, and up through there. So you can do the extremities real easy. Honestly, Rock Tape's YouTube videos are pretty solid as far as the instruction and where you can use it. Obviously you're not going to be able to use it on the neck. There's a couple people I've been tempted, but you can use it on the torso. It's a way, like, you can wrap it around your ribs, and you can do like some stuff for your lats. If you want to do like thoracic rotation, you can put the band around your chest, and you can do some of that as well. It's just, so like I said, ankle recovery, knees, calf or Achilles, things that it's like anything else. When it's the right tool, it's a great tool. It's not the end all be all, but it's a pretty low barrier to entry because, like I said, it's $20 to $30 to get a floss band, and you can go get voodoos, you can go get rock tapes, you can go get whatever. They're all more or less the same, so you can find the random fitness pro excellence band or something like that. Your 3-letter acronym, whatever. Yeah. So good tool, like I said, and any of the extremities, it's decent on. Like I said, I've done some work on the torso. You can also use the band itself. You don't necessarily have to wrap it around an area. If you feel like there's a tissue that's tight, you can use it just as an extra grip. So, give me one sec here.
Go get it.
I'm such a visual person, so I apologize to anybody that's just listening, but I've got a floss band in my hand. But so, like, if I was feeling like the tissue on my forearm wasn't moving quite as well as I wanted to, you can just take a piece of it, slap it over, and you can just tack down and like do a little skin drag with it. And that's a way to get in and get really isolated. If you've got a trigger point, you don't necessarily have to wrap the whole band. You can just kind of tack that tissue down, and then same thing, go through some range of motion as a way to create a little bit more movement in the tissue. The osteopaths have a thing called a Dysum pad that all it is a square, 8x8 square, 12x12 square that they'll slap on the skin and use that to glide. So a lot of versatility. The only thing with floss bands is they are made of latex. So if anyone has a latex allergy, you'll have to find an alternative. That's the only, that's the biggest like safety thing is like, yeah, they are latex. So, I don't think they have a lambskin version or other things, but
it's kind of interesting too with you kind of talking more about the floss band, and even just with us using it.
Mm-hmm.
I almost like it more than the Normatec because the Normatec is so hyper specified to you not moving. And then with the idea of getting blood flow, getting movement, you starting to trust, hey, this knee does feel pretty good. It almost makes more sense because you've got a Normatec that's costing, let's say, $1,500, and then I could get 15 different floss bands, which it sounds kind of useless, but maybe like, 2 really good floss bands that I could do phenomenal work all over my body, not just my legs, and then have to purchase the arms. It almost sounds like a long-term better solution than, some like compression therapies such as Normatec. Would you buy into that?
Yeah. So again, barrier to entry, it's way cheaper. If you're going to go about floss bands, I would recommend get the 2-inch and get a 4-inch band. There are some logistics. You don't necessarily want to wrap a bunch of areas at the same time. So you could wrap above and below your knee, but there's like a general guideline of like try not to leave the band on for more than 3 minutes, and then give about 3 minutes for recovery. The tissue, blood flow, more of a blood flow, get that back into those smaller blood vessels that are the capillaries in particular that it's getting squeezed out of. Yeah, could it be a replacement for Norma? Absolutely. Like, Norma's great, but Norma's expensive. Norma is a passive modality, so there's pros and cons to it. Like, if you're just absolutely exhausted after a workout and want to put your feet up in the Norma, like, yeah, that's fine. Like, it's good. If you're, I guess I tend to think of Norma a bit more for generic extremity recovery as opposed to dealing with a specific issue. The floss bands are much better at specificity. So you got a general, you got your shotgun, and you got your sniper. And if you're, you're feeling tight in the ankles, like, go for a floss band. I would go for a floss band over Normatec. I have both, and I still use the floss band a bit more if my knees are bugging me. But if my legs are just toast, I'll go hop in the Normatec and get my feet up and go from there. So
yeah, That's
Yeah.
beautiful. Just to kind of end this off, I did, and I feel like we'd stay here for another hour and a half if I really dove into this, but
Yeah.
I do kind of want to see the interconnection between your martial arts and your practice, your massage therapy practice. Like, do you feel like you've actually had a lot of, like translation because you're, all this combat, you're learning how to move the body, break the body. It almost can play into you helping someone recover. Can you kind of speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got into martial arts as a tween, and you learn there's advantages to when you're learning massage because I already knew how to apply force. If
Mm.
I'm throwing a punch, if I'm putting pressure on somebody, like I understand the biomechanics or behind it. So to go and do that in a therapeutic process is easy. It's like, oh, okay. If I lean this way, I'm going to put most of my body weight into my palm so that gets a drag going, or I can lean in with my forearm and push that through tissue. So the learning curve's a lot faster. My massage instructor in school was also a martial artist, so he loved teaching martial artists how to do massage. He's like, no, front stance, and like boom, boom, and he's like perfect, and he walked away. And some of it was we had a more universal vocabulary. So the understanding how to apply pressure to people is kind of universal. It's just understanding again, what's the Goldilocks zone? Not enough pressure, and I'm not doing anything for anybody. In the middle there, well, it's therapeutic, and if it's really heavy, it's martial. So it's neat because you kind of learn in martial arts. You learn generally how the body moves, and the reason for it is so you can take advantage of it. Like knees only go into like 5 degrees of extension, but if you make it go 10 or 15 or 30, like it's a bad day. So you learn kind of the general principles of mechanics, and then that makes sense in my own biomechanics when working, and then also understanding clients. And it's one of those that it's if you look at some of the older models, and if you go back and watch some of like the cult kung fu films, I'm trying to think. I can't remember the particular historical figure, but there's an individual that was well known as an acupuncturist, medicinal practitioner that was also this crazy good martial artist. And in historic parts of China, like the best person for trauma that the village would go to was the martial arts instructor, because he was always putting his students back together. So when the farmer out in the field threw his back out trying to move one of the oxen, they'd drag him over to the martial arts instructor, and he would, fix his back and put him back out in his field to do his thing. So there's this long history of the martial and medicinal being intertwined, and it's it's fun. I go to a class, and it doesn't matter what the class is. I can go to a martial arts seminar, and like, oh, we're gonna do this, and that. And I'm like, oh, cool. I actually do a similar movement when I'm, working somebody's shoulder to get them out on the platform again. And then I'll go to a class for, massage, and it's we're gonna take a look at this maneuver and whatnot. I'm like, oh, that'd be a good way to get in and underneath, and I got to try that in my next ninja class, and these other things. So it's they've been very very closely associated with each other for a long time, and it's things go the way they do, and that got separated out, or different cultures develop different principles. But I love both of them. Everything I learn about the body it helps my, pun intended, body of knowledge, and then that I can apply it sort of to whichever endeavor I'm currently in. So it's kind of one of those when it comes to, like, I was talking about leaving animal training and getting into something else. I wasn't making enough of those connections in life. Like, it didn't feel like the right place. And I feel like I'm much closer to that perfect spot, because it is like so much overlaps when I do I read something, I'm like, oh, that applies in how I deal with people on the mat, that how it applies to how I deal with them on the table or on the pool deck and whatnot. So it's all interrelated right now, and it's fun. I'm like, all right, I feel like I should be here or pretty close to here. That's nice. If you want to get into big, like, did I manifest this? Was this brought forward? Was this my path? But it has that feeling to it for sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, thank you for your time. Maybe we'll have to do a part 2 just on the interconnectedness of martial arts and going kind of deeper in that. But again, thank you for your time. I think a lot of athletes
absolutely
will benefit from this. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. My pleasure.
All right. We'll catch you later. Thanks, Kelly.
All right. Take care.